Welcome back to my channel. Grab a few of your favorite brushes and some of your favorite paint colors, and let's paint together today. As always, I start by laying down a neutral wash. I'm going to take burnt sienna to very loosely sketch my image, the dreaded hands. I think most artists will agree, hands are one of the most challenging body parts to recreate, whether you are painting, drawing, or sculpting. Granted, the human figure is extremely complex, and to think any part of the body is easy would be lying. It takes a lot of practice and patience, and I feel as an artist, there is no such thing as mastering anything. Because once you feel comfortable, you get bored. And when you're bored, you start to experiment. And that's how art is born. So while you paint with me today, try not to get too frustrated. The hands in particular are one of these subjects that require a lot of layers. I'd like to add, there are many different ways to paint hands as well. Many artists don't go into as much detail, especially if the hands are not the focal point of the painting. And some artists go for every wrinkle and crease a hand has. So it depends on your style and the purpose for what the hand represents in your vision. You'll notice I am using black, but I actually mixed burnt umber with cobalt blue and a bit of black because a pure black will flatten the image. But I wish I had even left out the black because when blending and building up the layers, it made the center of the hand a bit muddy, and that's where the frustration sets in. So when I say it's kind of frustrating to paint hands, it's because there's a lot of back and forth, repainting layers over, tweaking the dark shadows, and making sure you are not losing some of the crucial shapes. Even if you're not going for too much detail, there's just a lot of detail in a hand naturally. While we lay in the rest of the underpainting, let's talk about my favorite subject, horror movies. I recently rewatched Event Horizon. It was a 90s sci-fi horror where a spaceship travels through a space gateway or a black hole and comes back as pure evil and kills everyone on the ship. I felt like it was a message to be careful what you mess with. As humans, we have discovered so many great things, invented great machines, and our technology is advancing faster than our brains can even handle. But we need to be careful. I'd love it if the world can slow down again. When the pandemic hit, the world shut down for a couple of weeks, and it gave the earth a chance to breathe. It gave us a chance to reflect and think about who and what our priorities should be. But the powers that be are too strong. They pushed us back into that rat race and continue to divide and conquer, while we are putting out fires that are immediate threats in our lives. Just like in the movie, the ship's power was too much for the crew. But I have hope that if we work together, we can overthrow this power. As far as the movie though, the script was horrendous. At one point, Lawrence Fishburne's character said to the grown adult doctor played by Sam Neill, "Hey, you come back here, mister." And the movie was full of corny lines like that. I feel like that was the epitome of the 90s though. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you watch this movie, do you think as deeply as I do about the meaning of it all? Or is it just a good movie to get your heart pumping? Anyway, going back to our painting here, since I am only painting hands, I started to lay in some finer details as you can see, But I'm not going to obsess over every single wrinkle and worry if every crease is exact because I'd go crazy if I did that. And you'll see as I lay down my painting here, I'm going back and forth from darks to midtones to even some initial highlights because it's really easy to lose the shapes and shadows when painting a hand. We are still in the ugly phase of this painting, and for me, hands stay ugly for a pretty long time. I understand that more experienced artists will paint them differently. They have a set technique that they use and they figured it out. Let's just say I'm still learning too. And this is the way I paint hands. There is no right or wrong. And that's why I don't even go into what colors you should use. Depending on what mood you're going for, the palette is as subjective as the painting itself. I go for a much darker mood, more dramatic, and one of my favorite artists that I try to emulate is Rembrandt. Your favorite artist may be Monet, and so your color palette will be much lighter and more pastel than mine. So honestly, as long as you know the basic technique of tonal value and capturing shadows and highlights, the colors just sort of come together naturally, in my experience. You might want to take a minute here just to study the detail of the thumb that I got into the painting so far. It's probably the most detailed part of the painting because that thumb is really the foreground, if you want to think of it as foreground and background anywhere on this painting. And so I did add the most detail to this part. In order to achieve the sort of skin-like texture, you are going to want to stipple a little bit with your paintbrush, which means just painting with dots rather than long brush strokes. And that's going to give you a lot of that sort of natural looking skin texture. You're going to add your lines, wrinkles, and creases on top of the texture. So keep that in mind as you're painting. Now we're going into the other hand, and if you want to think of this as foreground, middle ground, background type of vocabulary, this would probably be the middle ground because it's not as much in focus as the hand that's in front. And so it's going to have a little bit less detail, but we want to make sure that we capture the colors, the shadows, and the highlights to really make both of the hands pop. And again, it's much of the same technique of going back and forth between shadows, midtones, and highlights, blending it out nice and smooth if you want it nice and smooth, and just constantly looking at your reference photo, making sure that you have the correct shadows in particular. I also wanted to remind us that even though that these videos on YouTube may seem like very quick and easy, and I've edited it down to about 11 minutes, this painting in particular took me a couple of days. I worked on it for about 3 hours on day one, and then I decided I needed to take a break because I was starting to get blurred vision, and I also needed some of the layers to dry a little bit. So the second day I worked on it for another couple of hours. So the painting in total took about 5 hours. So please keep that in mind. If you are frustrated in between a layer and you don't know where it's going, please take your time, take your breaks, and come back to it when you are feeling better. We are heading into the home stretch here. I laid in a little bit more of my background, which is a pure black. So it's okay if you use pure black for the background because that is going to give the stark contrast that we are looking for so that the hands really pop out into the foreground. Laying in some of that background color is really going to help us see how much of a highlight we need, and we need quite a bit of highlight here. So now I'm going in with my lightest tones, basically some pure white in order to really pop out some of those fingers and make it look like it's popping out of the page. This is definitely the favorite part of any painting, is when you're sort of past that ugly phase, you can see the picture coming alive and it starts to just really come together. And for some of us, it's going to take a little bit longer to get to that point. Some of us, it's much quicker. Just keep in mind, it takes time, it takes practice, and it takes some patience to really build up to that level. Starting to really refine the background image so that the hands can be carved out in a sense and really come alive. I actually mixed the black with a little bit of white so that we can have a little bit of dimension in the background, so it's not just a flat black the way it is in the reference photo, and I kind of like that better. It gives it a little bit of a feeling of space and dimension. I actually didn't really know what to do with the bottom of the hands, but I love sort of droopy images and things that kind of melt into the canvas, and so I just did that with the bottom, and I really liked the effect here. Now I'm just adding a few red highlights here for some dramatic effect, and I think we are done with this painting. Thank you so much for joining me once again. Have a wonderful day.